So, as the impact ecosystem grows and diverse actors join the space, it is important to recognize the central role that impact should play in investors' approaches and strategies. And this awareness is fundamental to also address the issues related to impact integrity and impact washing, which risk becoming huge given the increasing multitude of players self-identifying themselves as impact investors. Our community of Investors for Impact is instrumental in this process as they lead to the development of IMN practices, impact measurement and management practices. So, welcome everyone. I'm Alessia Giannoncelli, Head of Knowledge, Community and Market Development at EVPA, and I'm glad to introduce and moderate this session on balancing transparency and confidentiality to foster impact measurement and management together with my colleague Gianluca Gaggiotti, EVPA Research Manager. And when in 2013, we were launching our research, our first research on impact measurement and management, our practical guide, we were the first ones to talk about the management component of impact measurement and management. And for our community, it has always been about using the data on impact to learn more on how investments were going, but also to take better informed decisions based on the data that they collect. And we were not focusing on prescribing defined sectors of indicators, for example, but we were stressing the importance to look at IMM as a process, which in our own framework has 5 steps, being the first one, setting up objectives, the second one, analyzing stakeholders, the third one, measuring and managing and monitoring results, and the fourth one, verifying and valuing impact, and the last one being reporting. In the last years, of course, we have observed a proliferation of debates around impact measurement and management, and we felt the need to re-engage in a research work that could, on one side, give guidance to practitioners, but on the other side, also strongly contribute to the narrative that is being shaped about this topic, including, for example, the crucial one on EU social taxonomy, which is leading to a much needed effort towards standardization and harmonization of metrics. However, what is important is not to forget that the management aspect of IMM, which is what should drive learning and decision making. So starting from this need that we felt, we embarked on a 1-year project, and today I'm glad to just launch our new brand report, Navigating Impact Measurement and Management, How to Integrate Impact Throughout the Investment Journey, which shows how impact measurement and management is deeply embedded into the DNA of the Investing for Impact community, since it drives, as said, the decision-making throughout the whole investment journey. So from the definition of the investment strategy to the exit. So to come up with this report, our team interviewed 45 experts and practitioners from the field to collect as many perspectives as possible with the attempt of being comprehensive and thorough. Other outputs which follow, of course, in the coming months. We collected so much knowledge that we couldn't just stop with the one report. So there will be a series of cases, but also there will be what we call a mapping of mappings, basically a mapping that harmonizes the work done by leading organizations in the field that will aim at clarifying the connections and complementarities among the different IMM initiatives, including, of course, our 5-step process, but also SDGs impact standards, the operating principles for impact management, the social value international principles, and last but not least, the impact management project 5 dimensions of impact. And then there will be also a series of what we call burning topics. And when I refer to burning topics, one that came up quite strongly is transparency. And through this session, we will dive into this topic with our experts. So we have the pleasure today to engage with a panel of diverse and very experienced practitioners and experts who are leading pivotal work in driving transparency across different sectors and stakeholders. So I'll start welcoming all of them, starting in alphabetical order. Gianluca told me to from Clara Barbi, so the Chief Executive of the Impact Management Project, a forum for building global consensus on measuring, assessing, and reporting impacts on people and the natural environment. The IMP is relevant for enterprises and investors who want to manage environmental, social, and governance risk, as well as for those who also want to contribute positively to global goals. So welcome, Clara. It will be a pleasure to listen from you. Then welcome to Daniela Grassi, responsible of impact measurement at UniCredit Social Impact Banking, through which UniCredit supports microenterprises and profit and non-profit social innovators by identifying, financing, financing and promoting initiatives that can have positive social impact. UniCredit Social Banking strengthens the active citizenship of young people and disadvantaged group with a comprehensive financial, entrepreneurial, and educational program. So welcome, Daniela, as well. And
Thank
again,
you.
last but not least, welcome to Paul James, Research Officer at Publish What You Fund, an independent NGO that has been central to the aid and development finance transparency movement since 2008. Publish What You Want works to ensure all aid and development data is transparent and available, usable, and used. So this NGO believes that this kind of data has the potential to be transformative and contribute to better development outcomes and to the SDGs. So I think that's welcome everyone again, but now maybe we have a moment for the polls, so we can also understand who is with us today, apart from our panelists. So if you can just answer this question, so what type of organization do you represent? You can easily click on your screen, and we can see, I think we have around 40 participants. So for, yes, responses are coming. And of course, the answers are capital providers, and we mean impact fund, foundations, financial institutions, then capacity builder, academic institutions, incubator and accelerators, market builders, network service providers, and then policymakers. And then we put other in the last category. And of course, if you want to write the name of your organization and the type of organizations, you can use the chat. And you can also use the chat to ask all the questions that you would like to ask our panelists, and then we can take care of them. So we have a majority of capital providers, and then equally split capacity builder and market builder. So good to know how the audience is split. And now I think that we have a second question on impact data. So this question is about the impact data that your organization share. So let's start to say that you do not collect impact data. You share impact data to be compliant with regulation. You share impact measurement and management methodology, and you share data on your own impact performance. Okay, fewer answers to this question. I don't know whether this is a sign of lack of transparency when it comes to answer questions on the impact data shared. Let's see. So I think there is an equal split now, still a bit more for sharing impact measurement and management methodology, which is quite interesting. And then there is also a high number among the participants of those that do not collect impact data. So also it would be interesting to understand why you don't collect impact data. So if you can, if you would like to explain more, you can use the chat. And then of course we share impact data on our impact performance. And what is probably interesting to highlight is that at least the audience is not sharing data just to be compliant with regulation, which might be an interesting result. So Thank you. Maybe we can continue, and there will be probably polls afterwards. And again, you can use the chat to communicate with us and with the panelists and to address your questions. So since I already introduced them, I would like now to ask them the first question. So the first moment we would like to devote it to understand really what are your most recent efforts in the field to foster transparency. And if you very briefly can highlight the two achievements that you are most proud of in this respect. So I will start with Clara and then Daniela and Paul using the alphabetical order again. So Clara, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I've had the privilege for the last 5 years of leading a forum, and it really is a forum where people have come together to debate these issues. And transparency has been a very big part of that conversation. It's not been the only part, and I just want to say that up front. To the point on impact management, management involves a lot more than just disclosure. But for the purposes of this conversation, I'm just going to focus on disclosure and what I'm proud of in that respect. And it's two things in particular. The first is, and I hope this will be welcome, but I recognize that it will also potentially be challenging. And it's that I do think we are at a point in the conversation about transparency where we are opening the floodgates to all kinds of organizations, big and small, purpose-driven, not purpose-driven necessarily, disclosing their impacts. Until now, the practice of being transparent about impacts, to a certain extent, has been reserved for the really intentional, purpose-driven organizations that believe that by sharing their impact performance, they're accountable to their stakeholders, and they also, I think in a lot of cases, want to share their lessons learned because they're purpose-driven. We are at a moment in time now where that is going to radically change. So if you look at regulation coming into place in Europe through the Sustainable Disclosure Directive, you're going to see it from the finance level and from the corporate level. If you look at what the IFRS Foundation has just done as of last week, which is to launch a Sustainability Standards Board alongside international accounting standards, and then you actually look at the disclosure requirements that those regimes are going to lead to. The data is, to many of the constituencies listening to this call, impact data. It is looking at companies' impacts on their employees, on biodiversity, on climate. And I think until this point, to a certain extent, impact measurement has been perceived as a separate thing for a small purpose-driven community. And then you had sustainability performance and the metrics associated with that. And the two have just collided. And so I think the thing I'm most proud of actually is trying to foster that collision, because I think it is only a healthy one. I think at the level of those, for those of us who live and breathe the data, it's been a false separation. And actually we need to get to a point where every company of every shape and size is disclosing what it is doing to its stakeholders. And then you will find differentiation in the market through the level of performance, not through who's measuring and who's not measuring. So that's the single most important thing, I think, for me. I've just led the IFRS Foundation's project to establish that board. So that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, although I genuinely believe it was the work of many, many people that allowed us to establish that board last week. And the only other thing I would say that I think is critical for transparency, which I'm also really proud of playing a part in, is the greater emphasis on thresholds. And what I mean by that is social and ecological thresholds that give practitioners and their constituencies a common understanding of what good enough is for performance on a given topic. In climate, science-based targets and science-based thresholds and net zero and the Paris Agreement and all of the infrastructure that's come into place to support this idea of a common understanding of what we're trying to get to has really path braked for us. But we need to apply the same logic to the many other issues. Even with living wage, there are states in India where there's variation in the living wage by state, let alone by country. And until we have those thresholds, frankly, we actually can't talk about positive or negative impact. We throw out those terms, this is bad, this is good. But you actually only know that if you're comparing performance to an agreed upon thresholds where the stakeholders experiencing the change have had a voice in the determination of that threshold. So that would be the second one. And I will pass to my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Alessia, and hi everybody. And about fostering transparency, UniCredit Social Impact Banking has created a methodology for this exact purpose. This means that we really want to give a contribution to the transparency of the impact measurement and management, which lays the foundation for an open discussion with our relevant stakeholders, meaning clients, but also employees and the community at large, regarding what it means to identify social value and sustainability in business projects with a long-term perspective. Thanks to our methodology, we are able to measure and substantiate both the social outcomes deriving directly from our activities and also the indirect social outcomes generated by the projects that we finance in terms of their final beneficiaries. That means that we really are able to measure which is the positive changes experienced by beneficiaries of projects that we finance. For instance, since the beginning of our program, more than 1.8 million of beneficiaries have been involved by projects supported with impact financing. Making such metrics tangible has not been a simple path for us, and this is the result of a collective action of learning, experimentation, listening, based on a financial offer, but also on a non-financial offer to our clients, opening with an open discussion with our clients and employees, trying to identify in concrete social objectives and tangible dimension of impact generated. So our focus has been on intentionality, measurability, and additionality of the results achieved that we perfectly know that are the main characteristic, the key aspect of social impact banking. And thanks to our intervention, we aim to achieve two main goals. The first one is expanding our social impact in the community thanks to this impact finance, with the aim of generating a social and economic well-being at the individual level and for the community at large as well, and also spreading the culture of social impact, both internally and externally, thanks also to our employee commitment, and thanks to our non-financial offer of capacity building and partnership within the social ecosystem. Moreover, thanks to our intervention, we can also give visibility to innovative, inclusive, and sustainable social enterprises who really commit to achieve a social impact on their beneficiaries and that are capable of responding to the main social issues of the society. So we wanted to positively influence a wider audience of decision takers, communities, and the market at large. Given that transparency, of course, also allows us to be more accountable of the results achieved, since we are able to concretely demonstrate our social commitment from the perspective of our stakeholders and the entire community. This also guarantee to avoid any risk of impact washing of our results, since thanks to our methodology, we can attribute the positive changes experienced by beneficiaries, both direct and indirect, to our intervention. And this make our methods more rigorous and transparent, since we believe that this is very important in any social results achieved.
Thank you.
Now I can leave the floor to Paul.
Thank you very much, Daniela. So for the last 2 years at Publish What You Fund, we have been working on an initiative we call the DFI Transparency Initiative. So this focuses on the transparency of development finance institutions, including multilateral institutions such as the IFC, and bilateral institutions such as CDC, FMO, and PROPARCO. DFIs have obviously been at the forefront of impact investing for decades. Indeed, the IFC has posited itself as the original impact investor. And they've played an important role in shaping the sector. Yet there's been insufficient transparency essentially from DFIs. We still don't know enough about the ways in which they invest, particularly when they're investing in the private sector, and the impacts that these investments have. So with this in mind, the initiative has conducted 5 research work streams which are focused on various aspects of the work of development finance institutions, from looking at from their basic project information, so how we identify the types of investments they make, through to impact management, ESG and accountability, the financial structuring of their investments, and the transparency of their activities with financial intermediaries. Across these work streams, transparency has been the key focus. So the ways in which information can be disclosed. But I think reflecting on what Daniela and Clara have said, and with a focus particularly on the impact management work we have looked at, we have really focused not only on the disclosure of data, but on the processes which lead to impact data being created. So we have looked at the ways in which DFIs disclose their impact management methodologies, the alignment of key indicators, key performance indicators, and then the measurement systems they have in place prior to data disclosure. So we're really trying to look at the whole chain of impact management when it comes to that aspect of transparency. When we talk about what we're probably most proud of, last week we launched the DFI Transparency Tool, which is a tool consisting of 52 indicators. And these indicators are based on the types of information that a range of stakeholders told us across the 2 years of research were the most important types of information they were looking for. So just to kind of dig into impact management a bit more on as one of the components of this tool, not only do we look for ex post and ex ante impact indicator data, we also look for transparency again around the disclosure of alignment to various standards, and a methodology for how each DFI collects and then presents its impact data. I'd say the other thing we've been quite proud of is the multi-stakeholder approach we have taken ourselves to reach this point. And we've brought together numerous DFIs, both multilateral and bilateral, alongside a lot of private sector actors, whether they be from private equity funds, investment managers, or commercial banks, and then also civil society throughout, from think tanks to accountability organizations. And we brought these together in panels for each of our work streams. And I think what came out of that really was a broad agreement that we need to move forward when it comes to the transparency of impact. And we really kind of held together a kind of broad church of voices which agreed that increasing transparency is important for a number of stakeholders, and not least to kind of improve the outcomes from impact investing.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thanks, Alessia, for setting the scene and for launching the report, and thanks to the speakers for introducing their groundbreaking activities linked to transparency and impact measurement and management. I hope by now, after this first part of the session, all the participants are aware of the diversity that we have present today in our panel. And I would like now to dive into the second part of the panel discussion. And as before, I would like to do it in an interactive way. So first of all, I'd like to launch the next poll. And yeah, as you can see here, we would like to get your view on what you think are the key barriers to disclose impact data. And obviously, you can select more than one answer. I can also already maybe share the results, but we have different options. There's lack of reporting capacity, lack of standards, and in general harmonization. We have confidentiality, there's lack of incentives, lack of trust, and then, in case you have identified other elements, we encourage you to write them down in the chat. So I see there's lack of standards and harmonization is the predominant option selected by almost half of the respondents, followed by lack of reporting capacity, and confidentiality and incentives goes hand in hand. So I'll wait still maybe 10 seconds to see whether we have some other answers, but I think the results are somehow clear and very interesting. So I'll close the polls. And obviously, as the title of the session suggests, we will focus the next part of the session on looking a bit at the different barriers. So we will look especially into confidentiality and how to find a balance between transparency and confidentiality, but we will also touch upon reporting capacity and standards and harmonization. So thanks for answering this poll. So I'd like to pose the first question to Paul. So I'm not gonna follow the alphabetical order now. I'm gonna change a bit. So I know you've recently conducted, you just told us about a study on disclosure of impact informations, and you have also investigated a bit the tensions with confidentiality. Could you briefly share with the audience what has been the key takeaways from this recent work?
Of course, and thanks for the question. I think, look, there are probably three main points I would say in response to that. Firstly, we, as noted, we work specifically on DFIs, and they operate in the nexus of kind of public and private sectors. So we're often talking about what is public money being invested in private enterprises. And this has been really important for us to note as an organization, because there are often differing expectations, both of transparency, but then of commercial confidentiality as well across the two sectors. The demands on transparency are typically higher in the public sector than they have been in the private sector, whereas the legitimate concerns around commercial confidentiality are obviously pronounced in the private sector. We've done a number of pieces of research as part of our work which have highlighted the fact that what is really needed is an interrogation of what types of information are legitimately confidential or sensitive, and where it is more an assumption that information is commercially confidential. So often when we spoke to DFIs, we were told that various types of information, whether it's financing details or impact details even, are price sensitive or commercially sensitive, and that there are large barriers to their publication. However, we conducted research looking at the DFI investments into financial intermediaries in East and Southern Africa, and we identified numerous occasions where information which we had been told was price sensitive or commercially sensitive was actually being disclosed by the financial intermediaries themselves. So this actually highlighted the fact for us that in many cases the private sector was already ahead of the DFI sector when it came to disclosing certain types of information. Certainly when we looked at private equity funds, we identified a number who have well-developed ESG and impact reporting mechanisms. One I'd highlight perhaps is BaltCap, who invest significantly in the Baltic region and provide really quite disaggregated data about their impact performance. So yeah, as I say, this really kind of highlighted for us the fact that there is already often information in the public domain, and that there shouldn't be an assumption necessarily that information is commercially confidential, and this needs more interrogation. And finally, I'd say that something we've really noted through our work is that not all investment situations are equal, and this really requires an approach which is not one size fits all, but a bespoke approach to the relationship between an investor and a client. Something we found really encouraging was speaking to the Global Innovation Fund and some innovations they themselves have made with their approach to developing contracts with investees. And they have moved away from a boilerplate style contract, which determines what types of information could be disclosed about given investments, to a much more bespoke contract and disclosure agreement. And they found that this actually allows them to disclose far more information than they had previously assumed. And having spoken to the Global Innovation Fund on a number of occasions, we know they've been quite surprised at the extent of the information they have been able to secure agreement for disclosure of. And over the last, I think, year and a half or so now, they have significantly expanded their impact reporting as a result of this.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think that provides us already a lot of insights coming from this research. And yeah, thank you very much on behalf of all the audience for this explanation. I'd like now to pass the floor to Daniela and ask her the second question, which is more linked with the key barrier that has been identified by the audience. So disclosure should be not only of processes and outcomes, but also of good practices, because we believe that is crucial to define rigorous methods of impact measurement and to ensure greater transparency and integrity of the social results achieved. Why do you think is important for UniCredit to measure the social impact of its intervention? And what was UniCredit's contribution to favoring harmonization of impact standards? Daniela, can you unmute? Do you want me to repeat the question? Daniela, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Can you hear me? Yes, okay. So thank you, Gianluca. No, it's okay, it's clear. Thank you. Thank you for your question. And yes, when we launched the Social Impact Banking Program in 2017, we took a strong commitment to make a further concrete contribution to the development of a more equitable and inclusive society. We have decided to do so by offering impact finance that represents the most intentional form of financing towards achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This led also to a strong change of paradigm, both internally and to our customer, as we have introduced a further element of evaluation in the usual risk and return assessment of the bank, which is the social impact generated by us and by those organizations we finance. Our recently published position paper provides full disclosure of our method of measuring and assessing the social impact that we have developed in collaboration with our strategic partner, Human Foundation, and which represents a proprietary, rigorous, and innovative approach to this sector. We found it useful to disclose this model precisely to encourage greater sharing among the players in the social ecosystem with respect to impact measurement. In fact, not only we have published the concreteness of social results achieved thanks to our projects, but we have also made public the method that allows us to attribute these results to our initiatives based on the criteria of intentionality, additionality, and measurability. We believe that the accountability of the social results achieved is the basis for a transparent and rigorous management of the social impact. We also believe that through our business model that requires periodic impact measurement of the project's finance, the client itself benefits from new skills to measure the expected social results. And they become in a way more accountable of that results. So social results measurement reports that organizations undertake to provide are a further step forward in the direction of transparency and accountability. Moreover, we incentivize the transparency culture by providing extra benefits to the customers that they demonstrate to have reached the declared social impact goals through monitoring and disclosure. So thanks to the mechanism of the pay for success, we reward those social enterprises and organizations that really achieved the social target towards which they are committed. All this contributes to the dissemination of a greater standardization of impact indicators and their measurement, which over time may make the results achieved by relevant projects and initiatives that set social objectives in different sectors and business even more comparable, thus contributing to a greater transparency and disclosure in the social ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Daniela, also for bringing in your experience from the recent also and showcasing elaborating a bit more on the positioning paper you recently published. My last question for this part goes for Clara. So we, as you already pointed out, you've recently done a lot of work to help organizations identify what impact data to disclose to be accountable and transparent, but also what impact data to track internally to manage impact. And even most importantly, how to find the balance between these two dimensions. Could you elaborate a bit more on key learnings and on the role played by confidentiality?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things I think is really interesting in terms of this question of giving away competitive advantage, I saw one of the comments in the chat about this, is I think we need to be really careful to distinguish between competitive advantage achieved through superior impact performance versus competitive advantage achieved through superior methodology. And I'm going to be provocative for the sake of keeping the panel lively and say, I don't think that it is appropriate to compete on methodology when it comes to disclosing the performance on metrics. Where I do think it's appropriate to compete is on performance on those metrics. And I think there is a really interesting gray area, which is between the metrics where you collect your performance and then the analysis you do to achieve the performance. And I think there is absolutely within the analysis bucket areas where firms will have superior approaches to analysis. But equally, I think there may be areas even of analysis where increasingly people think there ought to be common approaches, more standardization in the public interest. So for me, that's still a conversation that there needs to be more of. But I just raise that as a framing to my response, because I think that if we're really focusing on where are there issues in transparency from a disclosure perspective, then we shouldn't be thinking about competitive advantage. We should be thinking about, well, what are the real barriers genuinely preventing a firm from being open about what it's doing to its stakeholders? And I think there's a really interesting one that we've bumped into, which is actually looking at this from the perspective of legal liability. So a lot of my work has been at the intersection of what this community would call impact measurement. And there's an interesting question about ESG metrics vis-a-vis impact metrics that if we have time to discuss, I would love to. But if you assume for a moment we're talking about metrics such as scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions, metrics such as water usage in areas of high water scarcity. If those are the metrics we're talking about, there's a really interesting area of disclosure which requires companies, if you look at how the financial markets broadly, the mainstream financial markets are starting to demand this information, they're requiring it because they want to understand where is a company today, where is the inevitable policy response or stakeholder pressure likely to come in, and what is the company's plans to transition its business model in light of inevitable policy responses and stakeholder pressure, including what targets the company has. And mainstream capital markets are starting to demand that suite of information in relation to how the company is addressing water scarcity impacts, in relation to how the company is addressing its carbon impacts. And the minute that happens, in effect, you are shifting the consciousness of the finance function in a firm, which has historically been required to disclose primarily data that is backward-looking. They're disclosing revenue in the current reporting period, operating expenditure, capital expenditure in the balance sheet. And that is necessarily a backward-looking view of what they have done and where they sit today. When you get into asking companies to disclose where they're going and then give insight into that to inform investors' decisions, you start to shift to a forward-looking perspective. And that is when legal liability does rear its head, and it is a genuine barrier. And one that we need to talk about, because for a lot of companies, you get into a mindset of, I never disclose my forecasts. That is internal, that is for the board discussion, that's for the management discussion. And we know that there's an element of estimation in there. And so there's a real discomfort initially in some of the conversations I've had where people say, I can't disclose forecasts. So the way in which we've been resolving this is there's two things. The first is to acknowledge that actually, even in financial accounting, which is primarily a backward-looking set of information, there are forecasts. If you look at how pensions are disclosed in terms of the balance sheet, it is effectively a forward-looking liability. So it is actually not true to say that there is no forward-looking information that is included in what you see in a company's balance sheet. But the second thing we've done is say we do recognize this is a shift, but actually there are ways to do it, to require disclosure that can address some of the legal concerns. And this is, I'm not claiming that this is solved for, I am claiming that there's progress. And one of the ways in which this is being tackled is to say, no one is asking you to disclose your forecast in terms of the carbon emissions you're going to generate in year 2, year 3, year 5, year 10, and what that means for your company over time, and say that, and hold you to that precise number. Instead, what we're going to do is require you to disclose a range, to disclose scenarios. And what we found, Gianluca, and I will stop here, but that's a really helpful way to remove some of the barriers by saying to firms, look, investors just want the range, they want the scenarios, they're not going to hold you to account if you don't hit the number. And this is all sustainability information I'm talking about. And I think that mindset is a useful one to tackle some of the obstacles that you were asking about with your question.
Thank you very much, Clara, for sharing these very interesting learnings and suggestions also on how we can work on some of these barriers. That has been very, very interesting, and I think it links very well with the questions that we have received from Stefano, which I would like to now pose to the whole speakers. Maybe starting from you, Clara, since it's linked with the answer you just gave, but it's asking basically in the spirit of investing for impact instead of investing with impact. And here, just a very small note for the whole audience to make sure we are all on the same page. We as EBPA differentiate between different impact strategies available in the ecosystem. And investing for impact is the one linked to more patient and long-term oriented and risk-taking capital that we find on the left-hand side towards philanthropy. When investing with impact is those impact investment that supports or companies and organizations that already have track records and that have a little less flexibility, let's say, on the risks that they can take. So small note, but taking this distinction in mind, where do you draw the line between ESG metrics and impact metrics? Where do you see a difference between the two? And yeah, I would like to start with you, Clara, and then Daniela and Paul, you can contribute.
Sure, and I'm going to use the analogy of traditional finance because it has helped me conceptually to think about it this way. If you think about different investment strategies, and Gianluca, you've just explained investing with versus investing for impact, and you said that that's about strategies. When we think about investment strategies, or indeed asset classes, if you think about allocations, there is a difference between a debt investment and an equity investment. There's a difference between a high-risk strategy and a low-risk strategy. But all of those different strategies and asset classes don't have a different accounting system for each strategy. They all rely on a common financial accounting system. And then the distinction between the strategies is about the performance using the same accounting system. It's differentiation of performance. And I think the same holds true when it comes to impact. What I see is that the measures shouldn't differ depending on the impact strategy. We need to have a consistent measurement system, and the differentiation of with impact or for impact, and the way that you've described it, comes through the performance that you achieve on those measures. So I don't think that we are talking about different universes of data. I think we are talking about the same disclosures, the same measures, but we're looking about distinctive performance on them. However, there's one thing I want to add, which is going back to this distinction between metrics and disclosures and then analysis or assessment. I do think that if you want to understand the impact of a company on global goals such as the SDGs, there are features of the assessment that you do that they may have additional features than you may use if you are looking at what performance on these measures mean from the perspective of risk and opportunity. So to give one example, and I don't think these are huge differences, by the way, I think that they are particular areas. One example would be if you are a company and you are looking at what your carbon emissions or your water use means for you in terms of risk of business model over time, you may not be as preoccupied with whether or not you as a company are demonstrating additionality in terms of your contribution to solving that issue. You may simply be interested in the issue is there, I'm having an impact on it, and what does that mean for me as a firm? If you are driven for impact, you may want a more precise form of measurement to understand the role that you're playing in the system vis-a-vis other actors. And so it's those nuances that I think are really important for the impact investment community to be thoughtful about. But I don't think this is about a whole different measurement system that is distinctive from what mainstream markets should be using. That may not be everyone's view, but that's what I would open with.
I completely agree with your statement. To be honest, Clara, I would like to give the floor to the other speakers also to build on that answer.
Gianluca, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Daniela.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Daniela, we hear you fine. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm really sorry because I couldn't listen to Clara. I don't know why. So sorry for that. But if I may, I can give a little contribution about the harmonization of impact management and measurement within the ecosystem. I think that the standardization of these methodologies is very relevant, and this is demonstrated also by the current European Commission that gave to the Platform for Sustainable Finance the mandate to extend the taxonomy regulation also to social objectives. That means that also the inclusive finance is considered a social activity, and this is very relevant because this led to the need of defining a standard framework of indicators, a standard framework of social activities shared at international level in order to identify what is social and what is not, in order to lead also companies and enterprises to better understand in which way they could develop and carry on social activities and achieving social objectives. This also is very important to have a standardized approach for social lendings and bonds, since there is the need of strengthening the definition of measurement and social investment and reporting, which should be based on a common standardized indicator. So we believe that disclosing impact data is a fundamental requirement to address meaningful consultation with relevant stakeholders at international level, and to add value to every project in different way. In particular, thanks to a standardization of impact management and measurement methodology, we can also have a credible market positioning of different stakeholders operating in the market. And this also is the key to achieve a measure and positive social outcomes for our beneficiary and the community at large. So we really believe that the next step to achieve a greater transparency and disclosure is also to realize a common standard of indicators and measurement.
Thank you very much, Daniela, also for your contribution on harmonizations and standards. I wonder whether, Paul, you have anything that you would like to add on the point, on the questions that was posed before.
Sure. I think very briefly, I'd say that the line, or whether there should be a line, is questionable. There are strong links, obviously, between all types of impact metric and ESG. Certainly in our work, we have developed two components of the tool, which I guess at some level gives an impression of a separation between ESG and accountability. And the driving reason for that was really the level of disclosure, or the site of disclosure. And something we were particularly interested in is the disclosure of information to project affected communities when you're talking about project finance, and the appropriate way that can take place. So rather than separating out ESG and impact as kind of separate types of metrics, a lot of that was focused on the ways in which that information could be used, or the ways in which that information could be disclosed, or the sites of disclosure.
Thank you very much, Paul, also for adding your point. And I think I would like to briefly elaborate on the point that Clara made, but I completely agree. We should all strive for a common methodology, taking really the comparison with the financial markets and how it works, as there's a difference between private equity and venture capital. They all rely on the same accounting methodology, and I think that's crucial for the future of the ecosystem per se. But when it comes to different nuances, they can play different roles throughout the spectrum, and that's part of our also work to recognize the role played by different nuances. And what I think would be one of the interesting challenge of the future is to also understand how we can guarantee access to those reporting and accounting methodologies when it comes to impact in an equal way, because we know that also the amount of resources available in different parts of the spectrum varies. And taking the example of impact assurance, for example, there's already in the research that we did this year, there's already like some challenges faced by our the members of our community in accessing these services, that not just at a price that not just like having access and covering for the cost of it, but also when it comes to the learning produced by it. Because if you are measuring the impact and you get assured for your methodology, you don't just want to have an assured that comes in and ticks some boxes, but you really need to make sure that there is enough trust and enough also subjective and value judgment that can also ensure there's a learning component of it, because I believe management is always very important, and if this assurance comes at a cost, you should also produce some learnings. But I completely agree that's the direction we should all work towards, and I'm very happy you provided this these inputs, Clara, Daniela, but also Paul, with your last point. I've seen, I don't know whether there are any other questions. I've seen one coming from Leonora, who's asking, how far will the UN SDG impact standards provide a more common framework for use across sectors? Does any one of the speaker has any input to share with the audience on this question?
I can share a few thoughts. So one of the things I'm really delighted to talk about that is not exclusively focused on transparency, although transparency is a part of it, that I think is useful to share with you, is that the Impact Management Project has been working with all of these different standards organizations, including UNDP, which has provided the UN SDG impact standards, but also the OECD and the IFC and the other UN agencies as well, in addition to the GIN and SBI and a number of the other organizations that you will all be familiar with. And although we as a project were time bound for 5 years, we're really delighted actually that the multilaterals want to continue the collaboration. So it will be announced soon, and there will be a webinar that will look at the evolution of the Impact Management Project into a permanent platform with the multilaterals as the steering committee. And our two big, I suppose, deliverables were to get the ISSB launched, which is the IFRS Standards Board, which I think is going to solve for some of what we've been talking about today in terms of globally consistent disclosure. And the other one was to seed this new platform, because it will provide this ongoing forum for coordination. Now, I share that both because it's very promising to me, but also because to address the question about the SDG impact standards. The key part of what that platform will do, and I will encourage you to go to the website of it when it launches, is show you how the UN SDG impact standards, for example, fit with the IFC's operating principle for impact management, which Paul is obviously very familiar with, and how those two in turn relate to PRI and their responsible investment principles, and how all three of those relate to the IFRS and the new board for disclosure that it's providing. And so I think we need to think about these standards, including the SDG impact standards, as these are complementary pieces of a puzzle. And what's going on right now is that the ecosystem is sorting itself into those pieces. And in some cases, it's recognizing that actually there are too many initiatives within one piece and we need consolidation. And that's what's just happened with disclosure initiatives. In other cases, there may not be. There may just be one piece and one player, and that's what the whole market uses. But I hope that's useful to Leonora as she asks the question, because I don't think we're searching for a silver bullet. I think we're looking at what is the coherent system that we need, in which the SDG impact standards have a clear role.
Thank you very much, Clara, also for adding this, and definitely we are also partners of this very, very interesting initiative, and we also included it in our upcoming report, in which we included some mapping initiatives in the ecosystem, and that's definitely one of the most important one. I'd like to take the last 30 seconds that I have at my disposal to thank all the speakers and the audience for also contributing to this session through the poll answer. It has been hopefully a very interesting session for everyone. I'd like to invite everyone to continue the conference. These are the next 3 sessions that you could follow. So once again, thanks to all of you. Thanks to all the speakers. We're really committed to taking the debate forward in the future.